Hello everyone, welcome to Reality Channel. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. The story starts in 2015 in Afghanistan, a place where religious extremism is everywhere and the situation for women is almost terrible, but not everyone is like this. There are people who think that progress and women's rights are important, but that's not who we want to discuss. It's about the victim, Farkhunda, and the people who killed her. The police too are to blame for not doing their job, but let me start talking about the victim. She was a very young girl who was still studying at the age of 27. She was from a family of scholars and religious teachers, and she had good morals. She was raised very well by her parents and was a very good girl. Her father called her Farkhunda, which in Arabic means joy of the heart. At the time of the incident, she was still unmarried. The event that led to her death was an argument with a man named Zainuddin while she was visiting a mosque. Zainuddin was selling talisman and haram things at the entrance of the mosque. He would sell things, and the money he earned for them went to buy drugs, and all he wanted was money. He was very upset with Farkhunda, and when she started speaking to him about this, he exploded in a rage and started shouting at her. It wasn't the first time he behaved like this towards women. The argument continued until a group of people from the area intervened, but Zainuddin was still angry with Farkhunda and accused her of burning the Quran. He made that up, of course, but it was the worst thing to say since people take the Quran very seriously there, and they would believe him. Then, some people who had gathered there began to believe him. More and more people came to the scene as Zainuddin was shouting, and he went and told them how he saw Farkhunda burn the Holy Quran in the mosque. The crowd was not happy to hear that, and they got even more angry, but Farkhunda kept saying it wasn't true. As the crowd grew angrier, people started throwing stones at Farkhunda, but she still tried to convince them it wasn't true. However, at that time, people were too angry to listen to anything, and they just wanted revenge. From this point, Farkhunda was completely surrounded by a mob of people, men, women, and boys, and all of them started beating her with stones and sticks because she had damaged the Quran. Farkhunda tried to escape, but people wouldn't let her, and they kept on beating her and screaming, accusing her of blasphemy. The whole situation was a disaster at this point. The beating only got worse, and soon Farkhunda's body looked awful, but the mob didn't stop there. They started pulling her and trying to cut her hair off. People did not believe her, and believed Zainuddin. Meanwhile, another person shouted and accused her of working with Americans and being an agent for them. Farkhunda was stunned by the situation unfolding. In the midst of the conversation, the people demanded that Farkhunda be killed. The women came to Farkhunda's defense, explaining what had happened. However, no one believed them. The number of people increased, and the police were aware that the situation was spiraling out of control, yet they didn't act quickly. Then, one person managed to pull Farkhunda to the ground and knock her down. People started beating her relentlessly. After a short while, the police managed to pull Farkhunda out of the crowd and led her into the mosque. Some people tried to follow her, but the police tried to put her on higher ground to keep her distanced from the crowd. The pain she was feeling was tremendous, and Farkhunda pleaded for them to stop, but nobody could hear her because they were all out of control, and Zainuddin was leading the way like a devil. As the crowd grew angrier and larger due to the falsehoods circulating, they managed to reach Farkhunda again and started beating her with sticks and rocks. One person named Abdul Basit ran over her with a car and dragged her for a distance of 100 meters, then left her to the people who continued to beat her. Finally, they burned her until she died. All of this happened right in front of the police, and they couldn't do a thing to stop it. Farkhunda's family was informed of the incident, and the family denied that she had burned the Quran. After a few days, Farkhunda was cleared of her charges by the Ministry of Religious Affairs after interviewing the women who were present at the mosque. From that point onwards, Farkhunda transformed from an accused to a victim of murder. Protests broke out in Afghanistan, and most of them were women due to their sense of injustice and the lack of women's rights. In the aftermath of Farkhunda's death, women across the country were outraged. The news of her brutal murder spread like wildfire, and people were absolutely shocked. The government and media started reporting on the incident, and it quickly became a major news story. People from all over the country started expressing their anger and disappointment with what had happened and demanded justice for Farkhunda. There were demonstrations and protests in front of the government buildings and in public places. People marched in the streets, carrying signs and chanting slogans, demanding that the government take action against those who had committed this crime. The demonstrations continued for days, and the anger and demand for justice remained strong. People were outraged, and they wanted the government to take action against those responsible for Farkhunda's death. The protests were peaceful, but the message was clear. Something needed to be done, and the government needed to take responsibility and take action. The women who protested demanded a speedy trial for all those involved in Farkhunda's murder. However, unfortunately, the number of defendants was very high, and 30 people were accused of Farkhunda's murder, among hundreds of attackers. It was as if most of the blame fell on the police due to their negligence. The police were unable to locate many of the defendants who had fled the country. The police started investigating Zainuddin and discovered that he was selling illegal stimulants and pills instead of selling charms, as he had claimed. The police interrogated 4 people: Sharif Begolahi, who was a police officer and had beaten Farkhunda, and Zainuddin, who was primarily responsible for inciting Farkhunda, Muhammad Yaqub, who hit Farkhunda on the head with a rock, and Abdul Basit, who ran her over with his car. The trial began under the supervision of Judge Sifiallah Miadi, who was known to be the most fair judge in Afghanistan. The lawyers were not notified of the trial date to prevent bribery. The accused faced the harshest penalties. The first session began where the court heard the statements from the defendants for just 5 minutes and adjourned the case to another trial. At this time, the lawyer for Muhammad Yaqub attempted to forge his age to 17, but the forensic test confirmed that he was 20 years old. On the day of the verdict, the penalty of execution was imposed on all 4 defendants, and 8 years imprisonment was given to 8 other people. However, on July 2, 2015, the Court of Appeals overturned the death penalty for the 4 defendants because they were unsure about the exact time of death, and that it was possible that Farkhunda may have died before they beat her. The sentence of the 3 defendants was reduced to 20 years in prison, except for Muhammad Yaqub, who was considered a minor and was sentenced to 10 years. All protesters felt frustrated with the verdict, and one of Farkhunda's brothers described the new decision as a farce. The family of Farkhunda was devastated and heartbroken by her death. They were in shock and could not believe that such a thing could happen to their daughter. They felt grief, anger, and a sense of despair over the horrible way in which Farkhunda died. They wanted to see justice served, and they wanted to make sure that the people responsible for her death were held accountable. The family was also very distraught and overwhelmed, and they needed lots of support. The entire nation was shocked by her death. Soon after the verdict was issued, Farkhunda's family asked the wife of the Afghan president, who had taken an interest in the case, to help them obtain a visa and leave Afghanistan due to their feelings of injustice and helplessness. Despite the protests and outrage, the case shed light on the issue of the injustice and brutal treatment of women in some societies. Farkhunda's death serves as a reminder of the importance of protecting the rights and safety of women, and the need for governments to punish those who commit acts of violence against women. Her death will not be forgotten, and her story will continue to inspire people to fight for gender equality and justice. I often add specific images related to cases I discuss on my Instagram account, which can be found in the description. Please remember to follow me. See you in the next video. Bye bye.